Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Eternal Card Breakdown. My name is M, and excited to do some new card breakdowns today. We have 4 new promos to go through. For those of you who aren't familiar, there is a new format for promos where basically there is a chapter structure, and each chapter that you complete, you'll get a particular promo. When that happens, you'll get that particular card as a result, which is pretty sweet stuff. So yeah, we're going to be going over each of the 4 promos in order. Before that happens, I wanted to mention that I just did a little collab project with Justin from Playing Board Games. So if you want to see us play Arkham together, that'll be up. I'll put a link to the first game in the description. That's up on the Playing Board Games channel and also on my secondary channel NMM Plays. I can pronounce my own name. It's a thing. All right. So yeah. Anyways, let's talk about these new cards because there have been 4 so far. I started by trying to just review them one at a time, and I just had like a not great recording day, so we decided to wait for the full set to come out this month, and there will be more every single week after this. So we're gonna keep reviewing them one at a time as they come out. It's gonna be a fun time. All right, Korra Thundering Steps 5 cost 5/4 hero dinosaur. When Korra attacks, she gets +1/+1 each turn for the other attacking unit, or each other attacking unit, and also has summon. The enemy player can't play spells or attack with relic weapons until your next turn. As far as things go, this is just like a really solid fill dinosaur. I think this card basically just belongs in the 5 slot where it's at. Doesn't have amazing stats, but generally attacks at a reasonable trade up, and the summon ability gives it a Svetja-like effect where you basically just get to turn off certain things that might kill the card, thus leaving you with a dinosaur fairly ready to attack the next turn. If you're playing a big mid-range setup, or even like a setup with a lot of tokens that then sort of somehow gets into 5-drops, you can get this card to attack as like a 6 or 7, which is around what you really want to be doing with it. It's not great at being defensive because the card is not like going to have a lot of health. It doesn't trade particularly well on defense, but on the other hand, you also get to shut off spells, which means no removal, no tricks, nothing along those lines that your opponent can play with while you get access to your finest hours or whatever it is that you want to be playing on Korra Thundering Steps the turn that you're playing it to block. So it can lead to a small stalled out, and it's just a generally good transitionary card from going from 4 to 6, getting from your early game mid-range units into your late game bombs that are going to kill your opponent. I don't think the card is particularly strong on a lot of different levels. I do think it is just decently strong on a wide variety of different levels. So it's basically it's not a particularly specific or particularly amazing combo card. It's just a decent mid-range unit that really kind of plays pretty well in dinosaur setups and also happens to be an extra hero for your expedition list, which on its own, pretty decent. Not really all that bad. There's not too much to comment about this card apart from the fact that it's adorable and the art is really, really good. Yeah, this is just a cute dinosaur that also happens to be a middle-sized dinosaur. It's not particularly stat efficient, but all of the different things that it has in its text make up for it in terms of it being a general value engine. But it's not a combo deck card. It's not something that's going to go into like a lot of wild types of decks. You can potentially play a spell lock setup where you're playing stuff like Svetja and earlier cards that also turn off your opponent's spells, but that's only going to lock your opponent out of spells, which eventually will be something that no longer happens unless you can somehow get your way up to Scourge of Frosthelm before your opponent can play spells. In addition, there's always a window, I believe, right before this unit is played where your opponent can cast a spell, so even if you're playing multiple Korra Thundering Steps in order, there might be something that will trigger like in between because it's your next turn that is when this particular effect goes off. So they'll have the opportunity to Death Strike it right before the summon effect goes off, and Facey just blocks this effect as well, which is always a bit exciting. All right, next up is Vikrams Bomb. Whee! All right, Vikrams Bomb is a 3-cost 3-color card. Kill an enemy unit, relic, or site, and if you have a hero, you deal 3 damage to the enemy player. So this is a lot of different things to pay for a card that only kills one thing. It's effectively a slay, but it's like a slow slay that also affects relics and also affects sites. The affecting sites in particular really means this card is likely to belong in the color triad that it's in, but it's not something that you're going to be splashing especially hard for. It's just something where if you're in red, yellow, and purple, then you actually get to play this card, and it's going going to be relatively decent. In addition, the extra bonus of getting a little extra damage onto your opponent, I think is generally worth the value, makes it significantly more likely that you're going to be picking this card out of the market or picking it up as just like a simple option. This card's something of a role player. It's definitely a card where this is something that will actually like stabilize this type of deck a little bit. It'll give it some good tools to actually deal with things that you want to deal with, and it's never going to be a dead card in hand because it just kills way too many things for it not to be valuable. If you hit a site with this, if you hit a relic with this, you're relatively happy about that particular trade-up, particularly if it's a big relic that costs a lot. However, sometimes you're using this on a smaller relic or a unit that's just like not particularly aggressive, and when that happens, you do have to juggle together all 3 different influence and pay the full 3 cost on your own turn, not as a fast spell, in order to get that benefit. And when that happens, I think that deal 3 damage to the enemy player is only a mild extra bonus. It gives you a little bit of reach. It allows your deck to be a little more aggressive than it normally would be. Red, purple, and yellow tends to be a pretty sacrifice-oriented setup, which also means that you're often dealing a lot of death by inches to the opponent. You're, blowing things up for like 5 damage or 4 damage. You're just running grenades or things like that. There's a lot of ways that like red decks can like sort of incidentally stack up enough of these damage-based effects that just by playing control, they can start to really reduce their opponent to fairly low amounts. And when that happens, well, exciting stuff can happen. Overall, the card is obviously pretty niche because it belongs in a very niche color pairing, and it is a particular like setup when that happens, but it is something that you're very happy to stick in a market in Throne, and an Expedition you're probably happy to run at main board because it just kills enemy units without any particular restrictions, and it kills enemy sites without any particular restrictions, and that's on top of killing units or relics, which is all good stuff. Yeah, very, very cool stuff. This card just serves its place as a role player similar to Korra, except it's a little bit more specific because of that color pairing setup. All right, the construction noises begin, which has been an issue with the recording lately, but we will be back in a less viable option shortly, or a less loud option shortly. All right, next up is Subversion of Nature. This is a 9-cost spell, which automatically somewhat invalidates it as a immediate means of being your like primary win condition. If you're doing ramp, then Subversion of Nature can potentially win you games, because if you're playing in like Argenport colors with like Martial Ironthorn Enthroned, or like Time Shadow Xenon, where you're actually like ramping just a ton with like the really, really big ramp cards that happen to be very common in Throne. In both of those instances, this card is a neat little chart topper, but notably, neither of its effects are necessarily going to kill your opponent. There are 2 options. One, you steal and ready each enemy unit this turn, which will typically mean that you are going to just kill your opponent with their own board. That's really, really nice, but it also means that a lot of different things have to be happening on the board to basically turn Subversion of Nature into a swing, which if you want to actually just win the game off of this card, that's typically something that you really, really need to happen. You need the board to be in a position where you can just take all of your opponent's stuff and also have enough stuff of your own to swing in, get the kill, and then just be done with the round. If you don't get that happening, then your opponent's stuff will be able to ready the next turn, and they also might still have cards in hand, something like that, where it's just not going to be quite as good. If you can't kill your opponent with a 9-cost card, then things are going to get a little bit dicey. But you can do a lot of like really interesting things with this. You can sacrifice the units to different effects. You can have a lot of different extra bonuses from stealing and readying your opponent's entire board, and that is a unique effect. This is not something that you can do under any other circumstances with any other card in the game. So if you're really looking for that particular sweep, if the meta really like makes it so that this particular type of sweep is a really good way to play the game, then this card is amazing in that respect. The alternate option is if the board is not empty, or the board is empty, or you just want to like win the game on card advantage, you can steal and draw the enemy player's hand. This is a significantly stronger route against control-based decks, stuff that has a lot of card draw, stuff that generally is just like, oh, I'm gonna play like 12 different cards, and then I'm going to just like destroy you with like this constant sort of stall out the board type setup. That does mean that Subversion of Nature is really, really good against those types of decks. On the other hand, a lot of the other types of decks that are going to be running against this card probably won't be drawing as many cards and might be close to empty on hand by the time you hit 9 power. So in both of these circumstances, it's a really specific scenario where this card is just amazing, and otherwise it's just good. And just good is not necessarily something that you want to be paying 9 for, so you got to be really, really careful about that. I think the triple shadow influence is decent, and everything else about that is like kind of nice, but overall I would say that like this is maybe not like the best option for your top end. It is a really fun option for your top end. Obviously, if you build a Subversion of Nature deck, I don't think anyone's going to hold it against you, and you will win games with it, because this card, once again, can just like take your opponent from 25 to 0 immediately. It can completely wipe out a hand of 10 cards and give you a 10 card advantage. In the situations where it's good, it's really, really good. It's very strong and does a lot of things the way that you want it to. But there are a lot of different ways that you can play out from underneath this card, and at 9 cost in Shadow with that deep of an influence, it is something that you really have to consider whether or not you're running it as your sort of main board option. I think if you want to like throw this into a market and then just pick it out later on when you're like completely full on power, that's an amazing play. It's a really good way to just say, oh, my deck has no late game, but I am going to get up to this amount of power. Maybe I can do this. But typically, if you want to get to 9 power in a game, you have to be doing it deliberately, which means you have to have other game plans than Subversion of Nature. That doesn't mean that Subversion of Nature isn't going to be a great 1-of in those decks, or even like a good market card, or even a 4-of if your deck is like really, really focused on those big greed. I am definitely a big greed player. There are probably going to be decks that I run at some point that have like 4 copies of this card. I don't think it's amazingly powerful. I think it's a great design, and it's really, really fun. And notably, it's actually fairly fun to play against. Obviously, getting completely wrecked by a Subversion of Nature is not very fun. If you are, if you have a full board, they have an empty board, they Subversion of Nature, and they kill you, that's not so great. But there's a lot of stuff that you can do to play around this card to anticipate whether or not it's going to come down, as well as to just sort of like make sure that like if that happens and you get reduced to a low amount, you may still end up with units left over. You may still actually win that game, and I think that that can be like a really sort of fun comeback. So I like the design of this card overall. I think it's a really, really strong design, actually much like the other 2 cards in this setup. Like they've just been really, really good cards that seem to really fit really well in the current expedition. Very happy about that. All right, and the last one, the newest one that we've acquired is Orens Lasso, and I gotta go find it real quick because these don't have a set, so I can't really sort them out easily. Orens Lasso, that's right. 3 cost, summon, give an enemy unit or relic weapon -6 while you have Orens Lasso. You can also pay 6 to give one of your units a random battle skill. Notably, this is a fast relic, which means you can play it as a trick. I think that in particular is something that does give it a little bit of an advantage. It's basically like a permanent detain. Detain is not a powerful effect, and it's not an effect that you would normally even pay 1 for at fast speed. But Orens Lasso does stick around for a while and also give you a way to sort of win the game just by slowly giving your units random battle skills until they are able to murder your opponent. If you have an absolutely insane amount of power, or you can reduce the cost of actually activating this ability, then there's a lot of different ways that you might actually end up getting some pretty decent benefits. For example, if you wanted to build a Severin deck and just like make a bunch of like Severins and then play an Orens Lasso and repeatedly give your units random battle skills until you have 15 battle skills, most units, even at like a 5/5 stat line, with all of the battle skills, will just be able to kill your opponent because they'll have double damage, they'll be able to attack twice, they'll be unblockable, they'll have Aegis, so they won't be able to be killed. It just kind of gets really, really out of hand really, really quickly, and that kind of stuff can get really, really fun if you want to sort of play around with that idea. So I think primarily like reducing the cost of the card is the more interesting like combo aspect of the card, and the fact that it can be used as a pseudo removal in that respect is really, really interesting. But if you don't use it for its intended purpose, if you're just using it as like a pseudo removal, and then you also maybe like use it as a power sink later, at least it's doing the power sink job. It's giving you a random battle skill at a really significant cost, not something that you'd normally want to pay, but that does mean that even when you're out of cards, and even when all you're doing is just like being stalled out on board, this card can give you a win condition, which I think is something that you shouldn't count out about the design. Overall, I'd say this is the least powerful of the 4 cards that have been printed, but the fact that, the 9 cost one might be a little bit less strong just in terms of like general win rate, but this one does allow you to sort of do some really interesting things, and like honestly, just being able to play a relic that gives an enemy unit a permanent negative bonus could be like mildly decent. I just think that the card actually does do enough stuff in the long game that it might be worth considering, even if it's not a particularly strong effect for the amount of cost you're paying for it or the amount of cost you're paying for the ability. All right, that's it. Those are the 4 that we have so far. From here on out, I'm going to be trying to review these once a week whenever they come out. They're just going to be always new promos, and it's going to be a really, really exciting time. So we'll go ahead and get into those as they come out. But so far, like, really liking this new format. It means that Eternal is continuing to do the thing that it does best, which is keeping the meta incredibly fresh. Yeah, that's going to be a pretty relevant setup. So like, I think that like when we are having just new cards being released every week, that really makes things very interesting as far as like little shakeups in the meta and little shakeups in Expedition. So should be really, really fun to play around with. All right, that's it. So thank you so much for watching. Feel free to like or subscribe. And once again, if you want to check us out on MPlays or want to see our more recent collab with Justin on Playing Board Games, both of those are up. I'm also on Twitter, and we have a Discord that will let you know specific notifications of when we have videos live and when we're going live. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.